What's up, guys? Kurt Hughes here with Ignite Baseball. Got my iPad out today. We're doing something a little bit different. I'm looking at 2017 regular season stats to see which offensive statistics, traditional statistics, not like wins above replacement or anything like that, which of these statistics are going to be the best indicators for which teams are going to score the most runs. So first, we're just going to start with the teams that scored the most runs this year. The team that scored the most runs was the Astros. They scored 896 runs. The Yankees scored 858 runs. The Rockies scored 824 runs. The Cubs scored 822 runs. Then the Nationals scored 819 runs, with Cleveland right behind at 818. So I'm just going to go through some of the traditional statistics, and we're going to figure out which of those traditional statistics are the best predictor for teams scoring a lot of runs. So the first one that we're going to start with is batting average, because I think that's one that, people that aren't really digging too deep into baseball look at as like a great predictor of their son or daughter's success. So the way we have it lined up here is we have Houston at number 1 with a 282 batting average, Colorado with a 273 team batting average, Miami with a 267 team batting average, Washington with a 266, and Cleveland with a 263. So it looks like that's a decent predictor of teams being successful. So I'm going to run it back to the runs scored again. Okay, so the order is Houston, New York, Colorado, Chicago, the Cubs, Washington, Cleveland. And if I go back to average, I have Houston, Colorado, Miami, which is kind of like, the one that doesn't make a whole lot of sense in there, Washington, Cleveland, Atlanta. So what you kind of see is you have two teams in there that don't really make a whole lot of sense. So you have Miami, and then you also have Atlanta. Those were two teams that didn't really score a whole lot of runs. Let's kind of dig in and see what they scored for runs. So Miami scored 5,602 runs. Oops, sorry, that was wrong. That was at bats. So Miami scored 1,497 runs, and Atlanta scored 1,467 runs, where Houston, which was the top team, scored 1,581 runs. So Miami was almost 100 runs less than Houston, but yet they had a batting average that was not too far off. So Houston was 282 as a team, and Miami was 267 as a team. So now let's kind of go over to on-base percentage and see how that predicts. So Houston, so now this one looks like it's a lot better predictor of team success, except for the Dodgers. That looks kind of interesting. So the order here, we have Houston with a 346, Cleveland with a 339, New York, the Yankees with a 339 as well, the Chicago Cubs with a 338, the Rockies with a 338, and the Dodgers with a 334. So you can kind of see that seems to line up pretty well with a lot of teams that were in the playoffs. The only one that's kind of a little bit out of that, top 6 is Washington. They're at number 9, but their on-base percentage is still a 332. So it's still pretty good, and you're only a couple percentage points off. Sorry, I got a helicopter going over top. And then if we look at OPS, which is the one that a lot of people are using now, and we sort that one looks like the most accurate of the predictors. So when we think about the teams that were in the playoffs, okay, so we have Houston at number 1 with an 823, which is really like way above what anyone else was, which is really impressive. Cleveland with a 788, New York with a 785, Washington with a 782, Colorado with a 781, the Cubs with a 775, the Diamondbacks with a 774, and the Dodgers with a 771. So you can see that that's a really, really good predictor of, really just team success overall. And and runs scored when we kind of go back at that. So let me go right back to runs scored with OPS. And so back, once again, we've done this a couple times, but I want to just run it back. So top teams: Houston, New York, Colorado, Chicago, Washington, Cleveland, Minnesota, Arizona. So you can see that those pretty much line up. The only one that has a lesser amount of runs scored that's in that was in the top tier of OPS is the Dodgers, which we can probably assume their incredible pitching staff probably has a little bit to do with that. And you would think that because National League teams hit a pitcher, they're probably at a disadvantage as well. So long story short, when you think about what OPS is and basically how well that predicts, and really you can only look at American League teams and compare them to American League teams because of that eighth pitcher when you're looking at, the pitcher in either the 8 or the 9 slot, because you're comparing teams. You can't really go apples to apples on that. But that said, it's really important to understand first what OPS is, which is on base percentage plus slugging percentage. So it really encompasses everything that a hitter does. So where batting average lacks, right, is that like if a hitter walks, that doesn't count towards the hitter's batting average, but they still accomplished something successful. They got on base, right? And then slugging is the average bases per plate attempt, right? So not per plate attempt, per at bat. So at bat defined as, a time that you get up when a hitter doesn't walk essentially, or get hit by a pitch or something like that. So when we look at what on base plus slugging means, it basically encompasses how good hitters get on base, and then it adds how much power a hitter has on a regular basis, kind of figured for their batting average, right? Because it's basically, if a hitter hits a home run, it's worth 4 over a number of at bats, but if a hitter strikes out, it's worth 0 over the number of bats, and you just kind of keep adding that up. So that's how slugging works. But that's overall probably the best predictor of a hitter's success. So based on how we think about slugging percentage, we can kind of like tease out that a home run has more weight than a single, even though that it adds the same thing for like a batting average, right? So for slugging percentage, a home run is worth 4 over a bat that it happened in. So like every time that you get a home run, you add 4 over 1 to the previous fraction that you had, right? Every time that you get a single, you add 1 over 1 to the previous fraction you had. Every time that you get out, you add a 0 over 1 to the previous fraction you had. And whatever that fraction is at the end after all those at bats, that's what your slugging percentage is. So slugging is really something that MLB teams are like looking at, and really OPS, but slugging is part of OPS, right? So it's really something that MLB teams are looking at. So there's a lot more value in power than there is in average these days. Obviously, if you can have both, then that's hugely important. But you may be thinking about, okay, as a parent, like, how does this apply to me, right? So we're talking about MLB teams. My son or daughter is 11, and they play Little League ball. How does that matter for what I'm trying to accomplish at this moment? So when we kind of take a step back and think about like what high school coaches want, high school coaches, they want hitters to be able to consistently hit the ball over the infield for hits, right? And if you want to be like a starter in varsity, and you want to be able to provide some of that power, so instead of like looking at, okay, well, did I hit a home run? It's more along the lines of like, am I able to hit doubles? Am I able to drive the ball in the gap and that kind of thing? And if you don't focus on swinging the bat hard and focus on power, then you're not going to be able to accomplish that. So all these major league teams are putting a premium on power, obviously with repeatability and consistency as well. But power is super important because you can change the game in one swing. So if you want to be a really good high school player, or you just want to play high school, you want to make a team, you need to start thinking about, okay, like, is my swing built for a Little League field, or is it built for a normal size field? Now, if it's built for a Little League field, then you really need to change the way that you're approaching your at bats. If you're consistently hitting the ball, deep into the outfield in little league fields, then maybe you're in a pretty good spot for when you go into high school. So the other thing is that if you're a softball parent and you're watching this and you're thinking, okay, well, my field's the same size regardless, so if my daughter's hitting it in the outfield, then we're fine. Yeah, you're fine. But also, with the way that softball fields are designed, they're way too small for the amount of power that girls can actually produce. So if you are able to get your son, or not son or daughter, if you're able to get your daughter to start swinging more aggressive, the balls that she would be hitting really, really well, they're not just going to go into the outfield, they're going to go over the fence because the fields are just too small. So you should take advantage of that, and you can legitimately have your daughter be really, really good at softball, like even better than a lot of these guys are like at baseball in high school, just because they're able to hit the ball relative to the size of the field a lot further. So it's important to kind of understand like how baseball changes as you kind of go up the chain, and how and softball, how that changes as you go up the chain, and how to best prepare yourself for that. Because if you're just thinking in your head, well, my son hit 500 in little league, that really doesn't bring value to a high school team, because maybe a lot of those hits that brought your son to a 500 batting average weren't far enough to actually be hits in high school baseball. Give me a shout if you have any questions. All my contact information is down in the description. Talk to you soon.